Welcome to another episode of Blackbelts and Boardrooms, where we talk to leaders who've earned their stripes through their leadership, through the discipline that they have built over the many years in their career. Today, however, we are not without a guest. It's just going to be Renard and I. But we have a topic that I think will be of interest to you. Renard, do you want to talk to us a little bit about what that topic is?
First of all, I'm gonna have to say that, it's good to hear us having conversations on here, without a guest. Don't get me wrong, we love our guests to death, but I think, it's always good for us to have some great topics on here. But one of the big topics that we discuss on is not midlife crisis, but midlife awakening. That's a little different than a midlife crisis. If everybody knows, usually when you have a midlife crisis is around probably like your 40s, you want to get a fast car, something like that. But we're talking about midlife awakening and definitely changing things in your professional and maybe even your personal life. So I think this is going to be a good topic. But I definitely have to ask Amir, what do you think about midlife awakening?
I'm trying to remember back. Wasn't that one of our guests, Divya Smith, who said that?
Yes, it was, which when she said that, it just, had the little light bulb pop up in my head when she said that. So I think it was great to change that analogy around what midlife really is.
Yeah. I do like that framing, just like you put it. I think when you say crisis, it doesn't evoke a positive picture or positive feeling, but a midlife awakening tells me that there's opportunities, potential, and those are all wonderful things. We talk about a growth mindset, and I think an awakening very much falls into that growth mindset mode.
I agree. I think if I look back in my own career, I probably had a couple
Mm.
midlife awakenings, probably from my 20s, 30s, even in my 40s. I probably have been in my career, but pivoted many times. I always say the journey is the same, but sometimes you got to make a couple of lefts, maybe four lefts, then a right, in order to get right back on to where you need to do so. I think it changes for everybody. Where I started off in my career is totally different than where I am now. So I think it's understanding and making pivots, and that's your midlife awakening in my aspect. What do you think?
Well, I want to ask you, do you think the 20s are the new midlife?
Oh,
Is that what we're saying?
Man, I would have to say your 20s. I always say like for me personally, my 20s I didn't feel like I was an adult yet, so I didn't know how to make the decisions I make now in my 40s. 40s I think it's all far as life lessons and getting older and understanding the difference. My 20-year old self probably would be shocked about all the stuff I do in my 40s now. So I think it just changes. For me, when I started off in college, I wasn't going to plan on doing tech. My future I thought was going to be being a physical therapist, going into sports medicine, working for some sports team. That's what I thought I was going to do. Maybe even open up my own practice at some point, but it did not work out that way. And I pivoted in college and went into something I know, which is tech. So, the short story of it is, I was in my first class in medical terminology. I was all excited. I was failing that class pretty bad. I finally passed the test, but my teacher told me, "Hey, you need to go drop the class." My professor told me, "You need to go drop the class and come back next year. You're going to fail it." But I'm so happy that you finally passed. So I appreciate the encouragement. The encouragement made me go drop the class, but then made my pivot into something that I knew, which was tech. So I was always around technology early on. And I'm not going to say what year that was because that's probably going to show a little bit of my age at the same time. But it was something that I've been in for, man, almost 26 years now, 27 years. So, it's been one of the best decisions I made. So, there's many pivots, even in martial arts. Let's take martial arts for instance. I didn't know about jujitsu until I moved to really move to Dallas for the most part. I heard of it, watched the UFC, but I didn't really get into jujitsu until I moved here. So it's many pivots I made in my own journey, professionally and personally. But I think that's what's supposed to happen for the most part. I think that's what's supposed to happen for everybody's journey. For me, I take a lot of those lessons throughout my 20s, my 30s. 20-year-old me wasn't even thinking about getting married at that time. So you would have asked me, was I going to get married in my 20s? No, farther from even thinking that. So I think midlife awakening is part of part of every age, not just the older you get.
I'm listening to you speak, Renard, and I'm thinking that I think what we're really talking about here is that what are the pivots that we've all made in our careers, whether it's early in your 20s or your 30s or your midlife or later in life. We recently had guests, Ryan Roberts, for example, going from a military or an Air Force career over to entrepreneurship. We have Divya Smith, we mentioned earlier, who also did the same thing. She went from corporate career to entrepreneurship. We had Vic Param from Veritas, same thing. He went from an engineering career in corporate and consultancy to starting up his own business again as an entrepreneur. So these are very big pivots that our guests made, and they shared with us how they made those pivots. What were the factors that contributed to reaching that decision and then executing on that big decision? And I think we see how they're flourishing today. So it's not just a matter of, hey, I'm going to make this big pivot, but then go and work at it, build that muscle, and then execute against the things you need to do to make that dream real. And I think the mastery of it comes with time, and I'm thinking, what are the pivots we're making today, both as leaders as well as, a global community? And the only word I'm arriving at right now, not to sound cliche, is AI. I think AI has really forced all of us to think about what that pivot means for every one of us. I don't know about you, Renard, but I was thinking back on all the history books I've ever read, and I tend to exclusively read nonfiction. I don't recall a single time where the pace of technology was so accelerated and that we were all, whether you're an expert in one area or not, we're all kind of learning how to cope and adapt to this big wave that's coming. And even though this is not the final destination for AI and its incarnation that it is right now, I think we're going to see some major waves. Just the energy consumption alone, how much power you need to even maintain this level of technology for the people who are using it, the environmental impact that's being had with all these data centers. If anything, I think AI is forcing us to think about renewable energy and forcing us to rethink our investment in the energy sources that we've already invested in. Infrastructure for power, for example, is another area. How do you design data centers that don't require so much energy to keep cold? Because there's a lot of heat that's generated, exhausting that heat and then making sure that you've got enough supply of energy to maintain those data centers when there's no energy in the main grid. Like all of those things are very big and expensive things to work through. Disaster recovery for AI, what does that even look like? I mean, there's no backup and restore, right? You're 24/7 constantly upgrading. So what does that mean from a hardware perspective? And as an operational leader today, I can tell you, that's one of the things I think about is how do I train not just myself, but how do I train my people to be hardware aware software operators, or engineers even. You can't be a software engineer without understanding the hardware in today's day and age. And going into the future, most definitely not. I think there's definitely a connection there more. So yeah, I mean, I guess if I come back to your framing and frame it as a pivot, what would you tell yourself, 10 years ago or in your 30s or your 20s or your present stage? Like what would you tell yourself that you didn't see coming?
Well, AI is one, of course. I would say that, but I would probably tell and then let's start from the 20-year-old self. I would probably tell the 20-year-old self about that I did not see coming was probably me going into management and then going into leadership. It was something I never thought about, at that time. So I think that's one thing, and just understanding the change, how fast the changing of the landscape will be far as tech is concerned. I think I've done a good job by being aware of what's going on, but you can always be a little bit faster to understand, reading a little bit more, figuring out things. Here's another one. And my 20-year-old self, I was not an avid reader at 20 at all. Like if you would have handed me a book and asked me to read it, it wasn't happening in my 20s. So now being a very vigorous reader, that I am now, it just expanded so much of my thought process and knowledge and looking past just what's in front of me and wanting to do more. It's like those are a couple of things. If we're at the age of we're seeing major changes in tech. Of course, we always talk about the dot-com boom. We talk about how internet has changed. Here's one thing, if we're just talking about tech far as pivots are concerned. I remember, and I will say this will show my age, when 1 gig of memory used to be fast. You remember that? If you had a computer that had 1 gig of memory, like, you had one of the best computers out there at one point in time. Now, if you have 1 gig of memory, that computer is not functioning at all. It will not start, it won't run at all. So just the landscape of all tech has moved very fast, but AI is moving so fast daily, daily, and now robotics is moving almost at the same pace with it because they're both merged together in that aspect. Going back to the original question, my 20-year-old self, I would tell my 20-year-old self, understand the change of how technology is gonna be, and that you are a person who can be a leader and lead other people and inspire other people. It's one of the things that at my 20s, I did not even fathom that I could be that person in order to lead and inspire other people. So that's one of the major things for me outside of the technology piece. What about you, Amir?
Well, I wanna pick on what you're talking about because
Okay.
you've said 20-year-old self. What
Mhm.
would you tell a 20-year-old today that's going through this massive change, you know? I mean, if I'm a 20-year-old graduate with my undergraduate degree today, and if I were a computer science or some other kind of computing related, even information systems or information technology, I'm probably struggling to find a job. Like, what do you tell that person, you know?
Oof. The funny thing is I had this conversation before, with somebody in their 20s, and I said the same thing someone else would have told me in my 20s. If you're going into technology, not even if you're just going into tech, understand AI as much as possible. I don't care what industry you're going into. How can AI help me in X industry? I don't care if you're going to medical, whatever that is, even construction, logistics, etc. How can AI help me, and how can I grab a hold of that now and make myself more viable for any business? Because you're right, going back to, it is hard to get a job in this age right now. There's a whole bunch of jobs available, but no one's getting them. So focus on AI, focus on grabbing as much knowledge as you can around it and be able to grow with it. Right now, we are still at a certain level. Grow with it. Get to where you are. Keep growing with it, and be prepared. And that will make you more viable for these jobs, because every job now that I hear people who are looking for jobs, or maybe even recruiters, they keep saying AI is one of the things in the job description. Something about AI is in that job description. So, as a 20-year-old just coming out of college, I would tell them, focus on AI going forward, no matter what industry. I don't it doesn't matter what industry it is, focus on AI, have that knowledge in AI, so when you get into that job, you can start helping that business even grow faster, because now you have gained the knowledge of how AI can help me, how AI can help the business.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. You know, I'm more of a fan of, you and I, because you and I talk about this, is we like to make things actionable. And since we don't have a guest on this particular episode today, I think we have the opportunity to make things actionable on what we're talking about. So let me start, and then I'll ask you to chime in. Because you're right. I think everybody needs to put in time in practicing, and you and I, as technologists, we've put in the time to master our craft. You have to. There's no two ways about it. So if I was a 20 something year old, and if I were to think about what does AI literacy look like, I think I would want to go and first start looking at what is the most basic prompt that I can create and what that prompt is actually doing. Go as low as you can, because that's really how you'll build that foundation. And then from there, start going into what does it look like to use AI, not just as an everyday tool to help me do administrative or operational tasks with these prompts. What do I need to do to think about the work that AI can do for me strategically? Because I think the thinking piece of it will become more important in the future, specifically critical thinking. And as critical thinking goes, you want to be able to ask the question, how can I leverage this tool in order to give me insights that maybe I'm not thinking about right now. And as a young person, you probably don't have the experience to go behind that type of thinking right away, not without some kind of apprenticeship. So in the absence of an apprenticeship, if you're out there looking for a job, to me, think about what those possibilities are. And here's the secret. You can actually ask AI for it. You can actually say, hey, tell me what I don't know in this area, and then start pulling the thread from there. Yes, it's a very generic prompt. Yes, it's going to give you very generic advice, but somewhere in that advice or somewhere in that output is going to be something new. And as long as you're curious and maintain that curiosity, you'll find something to pull the thread on. And then from there, you start looking at frameworks that other people have put out there, methodologies, because there's plenty of practitioners today who, over the last 2+ years now, have started putting out work that talks about these methodologies. In fact, I just did that this week as well myself. Um, but with that, Renard, I mean, that gets us on the literacy path, but not on the fluency path right away. So I think fluency is the next level. But what do you think? What would you add to that toolbox?
You hit on a key point about, starting off with prompts. I think you learn how to get better with those prompts. Make sure that you're using AI as your thought partner, having real discussions, and continuously ask questions. Don't just take, I always say, just don't take the surface level answer. Continue to ask questions to delve deeper into that, because that's how you're going to start getting better at using AI. Start asking questions. All of a sudden, you start having these AI agents start doing other things for you, etc. Getting that data that you need together. So I think it's like you said, start small, start basic, and then start building on that. Start building those towers on top of that in order to, like we talked about earlier, grow with where AI is going as well. Because if you don't, and there's so many people out here. Let's take out the 20-year-old person. There's people at our age who are definitely afraid of AI right now. They don't know what to do. They don't really want to use it, etc. And but we have to. You're gonna get passed up if you do not even understand the basic concepts of how you can use these platforms, these tools, etc., in your everyday, if it's your personal life or professional. If you don't, you're gonna get passed up. You're gonna get passed up, and that's not something you wanna do. We've been through these changes that we've had in life. We talked about dot-com boom, etcetera, from going from dial-up to broadband, fiber, etcetera. We've had all these changes, but one good thing about humans, we adapt, and that's what we need to continue doing. So, I think it's starting off small, like you talked about earlier, just doing a simple prompt, understanding that prompt, but continuously asking questions. Because as we know, and they even put it a little disclaimer in all these other ones, hey, you really need to trust but verify. Right now, it will give you some information, but you really need to verify to make sure that's factual to go forward. You don't want to take anything and then you start having conversation with other people, and that information isn't true. So I think it's understanding what AI is right now in its infancy and where it's going. But if you understand that, it's an easier path for you to continue to grow with it.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up the hallucinations piece of it because it reminds me of um, another characteristic, another trait that we all like to carry with us, and that is being authentic. So for a 20-year-old or a 20-something-year-old or a 30-something-year-old, authenticity means something else. At you know, just past mid-career, I guess, as we should call ourselves. It looks authenticity looks a little different, and I like the fact that you invited our age group as well into that conversation. The 40s, the 50s, and so on. I think um, eh, authenticity for a 20-year-old, if everybody in their 20s or 30s or 40s or 50s, they're all using AI, I think there's a risk that everybody sounds polished and exactly the same. And that is the opposite of being authentic. And to your point about, hallucination, it's one thing for me to say something in the absence of AI and say that this is true when I might not know it's not true or not realize it's not true. But it's another thing to say that, hey, just because AI said so, a lot more people would be at risk of losing their personal credibility because they said something that was, just patently incorrect because AI is just amplifying what it knows. And what it knows is neither good nor bad. It just knows what you give it. So the editing of that knowledge is on us or the people who train that data. But coming back to authenticity, I'm thinking that for a 20 something year old, for them to be authentic, even in the age of AI, in the absence of a long experience behind them, you really need to be able to start using that tool to solve real problems and showing up, whether it's social media or start your own company as an entrepreneur or working in a business that you might be an employee in. You have to start thinking outside because that's really, I think, where the authenticity characteristic or trait becomes very valuable. If everybody has the same level of power, then authenticity becomes very important. And for us folks who've, been in tech or any industry for that matter, more than 20 plus years, I think there's a level of value that we bring that AI probably doesn't have, but it behooves us to actually use AI to amplify what we know. And I think that's the other side of that authenticity equation. How do you, with the knowledge you have, show up curious and authentic and leveraging these tools? What's your thought on that?
I would agree with that. For the most part, like you hit on some key points, and I always say don't forget the human aspect of all this. At the end of the day, we have a lot of these tools, etc. We know now, right now, that the current the generations are coming up, and they're more focused on technology than ever. So I keep going. Don't forget the human aspect of all this. You have to use your brain in a lot of this. Like you talking about, don't take it everything, trust but verify, but really still use your critical thinking skills. Use that. Don't lose that in this age of AI. Don't lose these. If you feel like it isn't right, question it. Don't lose that critical thinking. Like you said, you want to still have your voice in all this. You don't want everything that comes out to be something from AI. Amazon now is catching that. People cannot come out with 3 books almost in the same month because now people are questioning all these books are just coming from AI and you're just putting these out now. So that is a limit on how many books you can even publish on Amazon now. So we gotta still keep that human aspect. People who write books that are authentic, it comes from them. That is still something that people need. So we need to keep that human aspect on it. You hit a lot of key points about authenticity. That goes back to that human factor that we have in there. I wanna ask you a question, Amir. Now we talked about 20-year-old, the 20-year-old us. What about the 30-year-old us? What would be that conversation you would have with 30-year-old Amir about where he's navigating. He's already got past his 20s. He's probably getting seasoned in his career, maybe marry, maybe start having kids, etc. What's 30-year-old me, or what's that conversation you would have with him?
That is such a powerful question you're asking, Renard, because I'm thinking back to my 30s, and I'll tell you, if I was looking at some of the risks today in the marketplace, and if I was in my 30s back then, I actually would be really, really nervous. I would be concerned because, if you have a young family, and I did, and you're providing for your family, you're always worried about, hey, is my job going to be replaced by this machine called AI? I would be very, very nervous. And I could imagine other folks in the same age group today, the 30s, thinking about very similar topics. Hey, I've got some years of experience, maybe 10 years behind me. Is that now completely worthless? Do I now have to completely redefine myself and the industry that I'm in? Can I continue in the industry, the career that I chose? That is very scary to ask. So it's almost like when we started this conversation about midlife awakening, as you put it, and I love that framing by Divya. That is a scary thought in your 30s, let alone in your 40s. In your 20s, it maybe doesn't resonate as hard, but in your 30s, it resonates real hard, is what I'm thinking. So the advice I would give myself if this was, me talking to me in my 30s, I would say, um, don't let what you don't control, define who you are, because that is the one thing that I would be nervous about, at least, and knowing myself, is that the work that I do, the way that I show up to work is how I was defining myself back then. And I think that extrinsic validation is out there for most of us. You and I talk about extrinsic validation as well. And you and I know that we both had to unlearn some of those things. Our school system is designed to teach us to always listen to and serve, somebody with a higher positional authority than you. Your grade, you're not an A student. Oh man, you're terrible. You didn't finish your homework. Well, okay, that there's a consequence for that. And then you're not taught to think independently. You're taught to follow a prescription by somebody else. So the 30-year-old me would have been very much in that programming mode. And AI doesn't really follow that script. It pretty much blows all of that out of the water. So in fact, if anything, like you and I already mentioned, critical thinking is going to be the most important skill that we can all learn, whether we're in our 20s or 30s or 40s or 50s. We're going to have to double down on that.
I agree. I think for me, if it was 30-year-old me, I would probably sneak the 30-year-old me a bunch of lottery tickets, know all the numbers, just find a way to become rich if I could have that. But I do sit there and think about the 30-year-old me and how the landscape was then. My 30s, people were starting to move towards SaaS. SaaS was this new technology. Everybody was talking about SaaS. The cloud was a conversation with everybody like, "Oh, you gotta move up to the cloud." And, now that we're older and understand what the cloud is, all it is someone else's server. It's just not sure. That's the only difference between that. But it used to be everything was on-prem, people had server farms everywhere, and now it was switching during that time in my 30s. I think then, if I would have the conversation with 30-year-old me, still in IC at the time, I think one of the major lessons I would tell my 30-year-old self was treat people like people no matter what their title is. If they're CIO, CTO, whatever the title is, VP, treat everybody like people at the end of the day. Understanding that power of connection and relationships, or start doing that in my 30s. I probably should have started in my 20s, but I would tell the 30-year-old me, start doing that. Treat people just like people. Understand that they got to put their shoes on just like you. They just got a higher position than you. They got accepted to the room before you. But understanding that landscape about building these relationships, I think would be something important to tell my 30-year-old self, who at the time was still an IC, still trying to understand the landscape. technology, working on a regular time, that's still working. I think 30, I was still doing help desk, if I'm not mistaken. Which 30s wasn't that long ago. So, but I think that's what I would tell myself: the power of building those relationships and treating people like people. Don't worry about the title. Get to know people at every single level, understand the business. That's another key one that I would say. Because now I say in my 40s, the more you know about the business, the better off you'll be. I would tell my 30-year-old self, learn about the entire business, the company you work for, and how you as a person can impact not just the team, but impact the business as a whole. So that goes back to that critical thinking and thinking outside the box as well. So that would be my discussion, plus the lottery tickets with all the right numbers for the past 10 years.
Well, if you figure out how to guess the numbers correctly despite the odd, Renard, you gotta share that share that with me. All right. Well, let's bring this conversation to a close because I think this has been a wonderful, very quick tour of I think an idea that you teed us up with, which is how do we manage the pivots in our careers? Calling it a crisis. So I'll spell out what I think I took away from this, and I'd love for you to chime in on that as well. So, crisis, I don't like that framing. I like the awakening framing. I think making it positive and growth mindset oriented is always a good thing, and that's something we should all be mindful about. Secondly, I'll say that what I took away from this conversation is you have to have the courage to continue despite the challenges in front of you. Because I think you and I touched on some of the challenges that we felt in our 20s and 30s, and then what we would tell our younger selves from that. And lastly, I'll say, make it actionable and keep working the craft. So if it's AI today, it could be something else tomorrow, but step up and learn consistently. So that would be, I think, my three big takeaways from today's conversation.
I like it. I like it. I will say one last one, and this is before we go forward, and this is the 40s.
Hmm.
That's the 40s. What I would tell 40-year-old me is that you are going to start a podcast and meet someone named Amir and start a great podcast called Blackbelts and Boardrooms, which at 40 my 40-year-old self would be shocked that that's happening. So I would tell my 40-year-old self, you are about to do something you never even thought about doing and have a great podcast with a great friend that you actually call a brother and have this podcast where we get to merge martial arts and leadership together and have some of the best guests in the world on the podcast. So that would be what I would tell my 40-year-old self.
That's amazing. So listen, feeling is mutual, Renard. I will tell you, I think this has been a wonderful journey, and I think you mentioned it as a side conversation when we were talking some time ago that you'll tell everybody you should start a podcast because you learn skills that you normally wouldn't learn otherwise.
Yes,
Yeah.
100%. I will keep saying that to anybody who's listening, start a podcast. If you're learning to gain those skills for speaking, being able to be in any room and have a conversation with anyone, no matter who they are, and just feel comfortable getting on stage, if you're doing presentations, etc. This is one of these places where at first you did not know this was practice, but this is practice every single time in gaining that muscle around great conversations, understanding, knowing how your tone, your cadence, etc. This is where it happens. This is where it happens. This is your TED talk. This is your whatever you want to call it. This is where it happens. And you also get the benefit of talking to other great people and listening to their stories as well. So I'd say that a lot. Amir is right. I say that 100 times. Start a podcast. I don't care what it's about, if it's martial arts, if it's about history, whatever it is, start a podcast. You will get so much from having a podcast. You will learn so much from having a podcast, and you will get better in these areas where you didn't know you needed to get better at, but it will happen because you have a podcast. So start a podcast.
Love your energy and enthusiasm for that topic. So, with that, I'm going to ask our listeners to please subscribe and listen to us on all the major channels. You've got YouTube, Spotify, Amazon, iHeartRadio, also on Apple Podcast. And if you have feedback for us, would love to receive your feedback. If you have a chance, please give us a positive review if we have done a good job and you're getting value from these conversations. We would love to have other listeners come and join our community and benefit from the information and the value we're providing to you. And with that, Renard, I'm looking forward to the next one, my friend.
Me too. Looking forward to the next one.